Let me welcome Dr. Brooks Agnew back to the show. Doctor, welcome back.
Oh, thank you so much, Kevin.
Now, we need to tell folks that you're not on the same phone that you were on last time. They may hear a little bit of a buzz in the background, but that's because you're traveling and you're having to use a phone at a hotel.
Yes, I'm on the road in Madisonville, Kentucky tonight.
Madisonville, Kentucky. Well, tell us about Madisonville very briefly. What's it like there?
I'm just not sure. It's not close to anything.
Uh-huh.
It's quite small, rural community.
Yep.
I'm just here doing an engineering contract for an automotive supply company, and staying in a hotel. And so if you hear a little buzz, it's not my fault.
Nope, not your fault at all. Now, your background is you are a scientist, correct?
Yes, I actually have a bachelor's degree in chemistry. I actually thought that would be my field of choice. I worked for a while in polymer chemistry and worked a long time in spectroscopy, which is basically measuring frequencies. The system that I developed in the field is popularly called ground probing radar, but mine goes so much further beyond that. It ended up being my PhD thesis, long-wave radiation spectroscopy for what's called tomography or tomographical analysis. What I used it for, because I could get funding to the university, was oil and gas exploration, and I was extremely successful with that, so much so that brought quite a bit of notoriety to the school. And in 1998, I made a proposal to NASA that I had such excellent data in so many different strata on Earth that if they would build a unit that did what mine did, they could send it to Mars, and I believed that we could find water or even petroleum on Mars. And I had a theory that oil actually comes from space. And they accepted it in kind. Of course, JPL built all the models, and I did not work with JPL. However, I did grow up in Pasadena near JPL and co-opted a little bit, so I kind of scratched the surface a little bit with them, but only as a high school student. I joined the Air Force out of high school and got my electronics engineering degree through them, and was top in my class there, and I built a lot of my own circuitry, designed my own gamma spectrometry, and was very successful with that. And I collected a lot of data, which was pretty boring. And it wasn't until I met E.J. Clark, I was giving a lecture on, I think I was talking about whether or not the speed of light was constant. It was about an hour presentation, and she came up to me afterwards and said she had an idea for a book, and she knew how the Earth was created. Well, as a physicist, I was always interested in that subject. So after a few hours of going through, as it turns out, quite common interests, her being an archaeologist, we pooled our resources. Took 3 years to write the book using quite different disciplines. Me having field experience in the snow and the heat and the mud and everything of the oil business, and her in archaeology. And we came up with a book that was just very close to 900 pages long. Well, when we found a publisher, the first thing they said was, "This is your first book. You don't want to come out with a 900-page book." So we trimmed the first book down to 530 pages, and we really condensed it. We put everything in there from ancient Greek and Hebrew and pre-flood and antediluvian information that we could put in the book, as well as the most leading edge physics we could find. Now, some of the stuff was still in abstract form. It hadn't even been submitted to the science journals yet. We put it in the book, and then we started to work immediately on Volume 2, which comes out in 4 weeks.
Okay, well, now everybody is up to speed, and they know who you are and what kinds of things we're going to be talking about. Now, you made mention of something that I actually want us to get into a little bit later. Your theory that oil, petroleum, comes from space. And there is something that I got off of the internet. One of our listeners sent me the link, And this is actually an article that was posted December the 1st, 2005. And so it's a few days old. It's not quite 2 months old. And the headline says, "Fossil Fuel Theory Takes Hit with NASA Finding." And so, maybe you had something to do with that. I don't know. But we'll get into that theory about oil in just a little bit. But one of the things that people wrote to me about, and I got to tell you, after I had you on the show, my email started filling up with requests to get you back because people still had questions. And one of the things that we talked about, but we only sort of briefly talked about it and had to move on, and I want to go back to that, has to do with these giants.
Okay.
Now, I'm personally very interested in these stories about giants because they're just interesting. I mean, it's just whether it's a myth or whether it's real, it's interesting. Now, as I started doing some research on that, what I came up with some sites that listed discoveries of giant skeletons of human-appearing giants, even in the United States of America, and quite a number of them. And a lot of these were in the Midwest. Some of them out here in Arizona, where I'm sitting, and but none of these skeletons that were found in the United States of America seem to have made their way to museums, and they don't seem to have shown up. Well, let me rephrase that. They do seem to have made their way to museums. They don't seem to have shown up on public display, and now none of the museums say that they have any record of it. I found that kind of mysterious.
As do I. The information that we found on giants started first in the ancient writings. We wondered where they came from, and in the research that we did, and I have to remind our listeners that some of these manuscripts did not exist in English, some until the early 19th century, and one document did not exist until 15 years ago. It was only available in Hebrew. We traced the origin of the giants to a hybrid interaction between off-worlders known as, well, they're known by several names. One is the Watchers. The other are fallen angels. And in the Old Testament, in most everyone's Bible, they're called the Nephilim. And these are not from this world. The records show there were about 200 of them. Not all of them may have been on the planet at the same time.
Now, let me clarify something. When you say the records, you're not referring only to the Bible.
Oh, absolutely not. In fact, the Bible, there's really clear evidence that most of the references to the Nephilim and the giants, except for their tribal names, have been expunged. The records that existed, I'm going to say, in the same time period as the Bible, and may have even been reference material for the Bible. For instance, the book of Enoch was referenced 128 times by Christ himself in the New Testament, but it's not in the collection known as the Bible. But the book of Enoch is replete with interaction between these giants who communicated with him, trying to find a way to redeem themselves off this planet. And Enoch, of course, went to God and tried to sue for their desires, and were denied. So they were destroyed in the flood. But the giants were a hybrid, and the Nephilim's DNA, although able to blend with us and was similar to us, had capabilities far beyond humans. And the offspring between them and mortal women were these giant-size race, and they ranged in size, I'm going to say, on the small end 7 feet, and there are even records of 36-footers. Of course, they grow very quickly and they deteriorate very quickly, so they don't live very long. But still, a 12-foot giant weighing 600 pounds that can carry 5,000 pounds in his hands. He can run 45 miles an hour. He can punch a horse to the ground with a single blow. His sword weighs 48 pounds, and he can cleave a man in two from his collarbone to his pelvis in a single blow. These kinds of men rise to leadership in warfare in a hurry.
Well, yeah, but now, I mean, I can understand why they would. I mean, that's the kind of guy you want on your side.
Well, they also had, huge skulls. Their brain capacity was somewhere between 3,200 and 3,600 cc's, which is well over double the size of a human skull. And they had a physiology about them that we don't have. For one thing, their body temperature was a lot higher. Stephen Quayle, who is without a doubt the world expert on giants, says their body temperature was somewhere around 115 degrees Fahrenheit. That takes a lot of Cheerios to keep that going. And they also had a huge nasal capacity, and they could yell so loudly that they could burst the sinuses of a human if they were within, a certain range. And they could practice what's called harmonic levitation. They could yell so loudly and make such an incredible sound that they could make objects levitate. And they had multiple rows of teeth.
Double rows of teeth. A lot of the
6 toes.
A lot of the stuff that I saw as I was researching on the internet about these skeletons that were found in the United States mention double rows of teeth.
That's right, and double was common, but there were others that had 3 rows and even 4 rows of teeth, and 6 fingers and 6 toes. Now, those traits still exist in human genetics, although it's extremely recessive, extremely rare. It's rare to find someone with 6 fingers and 6 toes on one side, but it's extremely rare to find someone with 6 toes and 6 fingers on both sides. So it has been bred out. You would think that a race like that would conquer the world, but humans were given a way to defeat them. There were actually 4 ways. One was, of course, starvation. They refused to feed them, and that meant they had to go to war with them. And they often were wiped out or subjugated by them. The second was to refuse to breed with them, and there was one tribe that was extremely successful at this, and that was the Hebrews. They, by covenant, would rather suffer death than breed with them. And they protected their women by covering their heads, because it was the long hair of women that completely enamored them. They just went gaga over it. But, for instance, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon.
Yes.
They were built specifically for a Nephilim, what they call the Nephilim god or a god. Someone that has wings, is an off-worlder, is immortal, and contains all the knowledge of the universe, although he doesn't have the raw materials the technology to make what he needs to make, would certainly be heralded as a god. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, in there is a throne to which this Nephilim god was delivered a mortal woman every night. And so he bred with women every night and created these races.
Now, you've given us a lot of details about these giants. For instance, anywhere from 7 feet to 36 feet tall. The double rows of teeth, or the multiple rows of teeth. The ability to run up to 45 miles per hour. You've given us a lot of details. How do we know those details?
Well, the Romans, tried to conquer the world. As they made their way up into southern Europe, they ran into groups that had giants fighting with them. And, of course, the giants just wiped them out. I mean, they mowed through centurions like they were grass. So the Romans developed a set of weapons specifically to fight giants. They used a weapon called a ballista. And a ballista was originally believed to knock down castle walls. But the ballista did not fire an iron ball or a rock, something that you would think you would need to bust a wall down. They fired an iron bolt. and at the end of the bolt was a sharpened, broad blade. Some of these were 9 inches wide. And was believed, although there's no records of this, that they would lower it to ground level and fire it at some 600 or 700 feet a second, and it would just mow through the front row of barbarians that they were facing. But they didn't need a ballista to fight barbarians. They could fight those with centurions. They used the ballista to pierce the armor and the chest of a giant, and that these were giant-killing weapons.
And so there are written records of Roman battles with giants then, I guess.
And there's also South American records. We just got back from Mexico in the middle of November. We went on an expedition specifically to find this evidence. We figured that there would be some paintings, wall paintings of the original settlers between Tula and Teotihuacan, and we went not the tourist way, but we hired a driver and went the way that we suspected. And we did, in fact, find one painting, which is in the new volume, and it dispels all doubt that there were Nephilim in South America. Recently added to the Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City is a set of stone carvings, figures, like figurines, and it shows 5 Nephilim fully winged with their glyphs. These are name glyphs that they hold in their hands that are symbolic of what they're teaching. And they are teaching a group of people who are noticeably 4 to 5 feet shorter than them. And what they're teaching is the creation story.
And can we tell what the creation story is that they're teaching?
Yes. And in fact, close to that in the same chapter, we put one of the carvings. It's 1200 BC. It shows the black hole vortex at the top, the earth attached to it, and beneath that, the 3 elements of the earth, earth, wind, and fire, combined in symbolic form, coming through that vortex.
On your website, I spent some time over there today. Very, very interesting. And you've got part of that website dedicated to the giants. And there's a photograph. And this photograph has 3 men, one normal-sized looking gentleman standing in the middle, with 2 giants, one on either side. And
both these,
yeah, what's the story?
That picture. Well, the story is, if you look behind them, there are circus tents. These 2 individuals only displayed one of the traits of giants, and that is their extreme height. We guess them to be somewhere between 9.5 and 10 feet tall.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much they weigh. It's hard to tell from their clothing. But the man in the middle is 5'11". So you get an idea how tall those individuals are. They were actually on tour in the United States in the 1950s.
In the 1950s?
Correct. And very recently, and we don't have a picture of it on the website, but I'm getting ready to put it up, in Iraq, soldiers found a skeleton 18 feet tall. The helmet is 12 inches across.
And you have the photograph of it?
Yes.
And I assume you have vetted the photograph so that you know it's not a Photoshop hoax.
That's one of the reasons why we haven't put it up. I can't verify the source of it, but there is an American serviceman in it. It is in a warehouse. We can tell that. I've blown it up, and I can't see anywhere where it's been patched together. But until we verify it, we're not going to put it up.
On this same page on your website, it says, and you already said here tonight, that the Nephilim DNA is very different from the genomes of species on the earth. Earthly species cannot produce offspring with other species. Nephilim genetic material can produce offspring with any animal.
That's correct.
How do we know that?
Well, mostly because of the ancient writings. It tells about experiments, genetic experiments that they did by breeding with various animals, bulls, horses, even fish. It's just amazing the things that they tried, and their DNA produced all kinds of abominations, but it also created a few unique individuals which did live and did create their own history, and Greeks and Romans popularized that in very detailed carvings and drawings and stories. And we call them myths, but it's quite evident that they came upon the scene and lived their short and maybe painful life, and then they went away.
But these would be the offspring of the Nephilim.
Correct.
Yeah.
And then the giants, of course, even though they were hybrids, they were fertile. They could breed in their own tribes, and the giants could breed with mortal women.
And then, where are they today? How did we come to where we are today, where there doesn't seem to be this race of people?
Well, there are three types of events that happen. One is called a cataclysm, and this is where either the Earth is assaulted by an extraterrestrial visitor, like an asteroid or a close pass by a planet, or a killing solar flare, or meteorites, or a flood. And the second event was, of course, the flood of Noah, which is the merging of the two planets together, which we really go into a lot of detail in the book. And the third one is they, because of their need for higher protein, they can't live on grass, and I doubt they could even live on the vegetables that were grown in most of the areas of the earth. They were meat eaters, and mankind that survived was not. We're omnivorous. We live, about 80% of our diet is not meat, and about 20% is meat, and we can survive just fine on that. But we weigh, between 120 and 300 pounds. They weigh between 300 and 750 pounds, and of course their body temperature requires a tremendous amount of energy, so they can't survive on celery. They've got to have higher proteins, and so the same as the dinosaurs, there just was not available that kind of supply, and so over time they died off. They did not have a Darwinian advantage on this planet, and so they just did not proliferate.
Now, in the on your webpage, you say their own language was unspeakable by men, as it took a special technique of teeth, vocal cord, and nasal shape to make the sounds. Now, again, you have to pardon me for asking this over and over, but I ask because I don't know. How do we know about their speech and their language?
Well, in the translated record that we have in English, for instance, there was a tribe of 600 of these who worked very closely with David. This would be King David while he was a fugitive. And these 600 could take on armies of 5 to 30,000 and beat them. They were a tribe known as the Jibrim, and they spoke a language that sounded a little bit like Dolphin. It just had a lot of clicks and high frequencies and low frequencies and basal tones, and very complex language. It was just unspeakable by humans. We just did not have...
Does it say that in these ancient documents you're talking about?
Yes.
It says it describes what it sounded like?
It describes the type of language, that it had high-pitched squeaks and clicks and basal tones. And, we translate it into English as gibberish. Mm-hmm. That's where the word comes from, is Jibrim, the language.
But they could speak any other language easily.
Yes, of course. They had magnificent mental capacities. When they could be, because they had freedom of choice, because they were part human, they could choose to defy their parents. Now, I don't know very many kids that defy their parents. I'm saying that tongue-in-cheek.
Right.
But giantish parents, at least the ones that knew the Nephilim, had a mission, and that mission was to subjugate man, to enslave us, to serve them. But, of course, we have a much better mortality rate, not only in birth but also in adapting to different climates, and they did not. They had very specific requirements, and gravity was not easy on them at all. They crippled up quite easily. They suffered from debilitating arthritis, and they would often become paralyzed from the waist down, or their arms would become paralyzed. And beings with no salvation, at least the first few generations of them, they would just commit suicide. And the documents are replete with that. They would just walk into the sea and drown themselves. They would take poison. They would stab themselves in the heart. They would just die. They did not want to exist as invalids.
So at about what point in history did this race of giants cease to exist?
I don't know that they have ceased to exist. There may still be some on the planet. Several explorers have run into them. Magellan, of course, ran into them, lost many of his crew to them in a skirmish in South America. And there are still tribes on the Earth that exhibit many of the traits. And there are remote areas of the planet that an intelligent, small race could easily hide.
By small race, you mean small population?
Yeah, small population, maybe 10,000 or less, or 20,000 or less. It would be quite easy for them to disappear on the planet.
Do you think that all of the reported sightings that we have of Bigfoot could be related to them? Or that may be just speculation. I guess it is speculation, but what do you think about that?
I'm not an expert on it. I get a lot of questions about it, Bigfoot and the snowman and Yetis, and I really don't know what to make of it. I've done some short interviews with people who are supposedly experts on them, but I'm a scientist. I like to go by as hard a data as I can, and if I can't find a genealogy or some genetic record or a picture or some bone, then I just, I'm pretty skeptical.
Yeah.
I have to really have hard evidence before I'll get behind something. I'm not saying they don't exist, and I would certainly welcome any evidence people have to the contrary, but I just can't say at this moment.
Now, and I can appreciate that. It's easy to speculate, but it's pretty difficult to sort out the data and sort out what is myth and what is real and what is probably real. And
it's like the subject of UFOs. I've looked at everything that I can get my hands on, which with the technology we have today is substantial. And I've never seen one of my own. Not that I haven't wanted to. I've gone out plenty of times and looked, but every photograph, every recording, every video is just a little bit too out of focus for me. I'm waiting still.
Mm-hmm.
The jury's still out.
Mm-hmm. And, a whole lot of things that are in the realm of the paranormal. And I put UFOs in that realm because it's outside the realm of our normal experience. And giants.
Well, in doing the research for this book, far beyond the research that I did for hard science, the word normal just doesn't qualify for me anymore, because there's this sort of scientific religion out there that if it doesn't fit the precedent of science, then it can't be true. And it's frustrating because when you're raised as a scientist and you're taught the scientific method, you're taught how to form a hypothesis and set up your experiments and, validate your data, and you run that kind of experiment, or you do that kind of work, and you're as objective as you can be, and you come up with results that are different than the existing, quote, scientific community, that's paranormal.
Yeah. Well, and the way that I use the word, though, is that whatever it is, if it's outside of our normal experience, you take the general population, the general population doesn't see giants every day. So
well, that's true.
That would fit under my definition here of paranormal. Okay? From our perspective at this point in history, we don't see those people. And so anything that is in the realm of the paranormal is always going to be a little fuzzy for us, because it's something we don't see every day. And
well, historically, when you look at science and you say, well, at what point did paranormal come about? Was it when Galileo tried to get the church to look through his telescope? Just look at the moon. Look through the telescope. Mm-hmm. They wouldn't look because that was outside their accepted interpretation of the universe.
Well, that's right.
Right now, most people, and I think this has been on the mainstream news recently, most people believe in UFOs. Most people believe there is intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. We're not really sure if science knows factually if there's intelligent life elsewhere, because they won't tell us.
Well,
we're pretty sure that they know, though.
And that's why I have adopted this position. You were talking about people believing in UFOs. My position is I don't. I don't believe, I don't disbelieve. I simply don't know. And because I don't know, the door is open for more investigation. And, there's absolutely nothing wrong, and I think it's a lost art, nothing wrong with people, intelligent people, saying, I don't know. It's a lost art, but I don't know is the foundation for scientific discovery.
Yeah, we like to, we have sort of a cartoon way of thinking about it. We just simply say, when our curiosity is at its peak, we simply say, that's funny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you mentioned something earlier that I don't really want to get into it too deeply just yet, because we do have a network break coming up here in a couple of minutes. But you mentioned that you have a theory that petroleum is, shall I use the word, abiotic.
Mm-hmm.
It is not fossil fuel, but actually comes from space.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, as I was doing research in the petroleum industry, what I did is I broadcasted radio waves into the ground, various frequencies, collecting the data that bounced back off of the strata, and did spectrographic cataloging between that and drill cuttings, which is quite easy to get from the drill logs from the oil industry, and from companies like Halliburton that they do gamma ray neutron scans of the hole. So it was easy to compare hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of oil wells to radio waves. And once I came up with a set of patterns that made sense to me, I started wildcatting. That is to say, using the radio waves to go out and find an oil well where there wasn't one for 100 miles in any direction. And I was very successful at that. We drilled 55 wells in a row. We hit. Of course, there's more to it than just the radio waves. There are other aspects to it. But what I discovered was that these long-chain hydrocarbons, some of them were 18,000 feet deep, and although the geologists tried to say, well, this is an ancient lake bed, and, this shifted that way, and then I would look around and say, well, I don't see any mountains. I don't see any seashells. I'm looking through, 250 feet of solid basalt, which is a granite-like substance. That doesn't exist in a lake bed. And then we're going down through other layers of the ground. There's no way that dinosaurs or plant material existed there. Plus, I was finding the same oil in Texas, Kansas, Kentucky, Tennessee, Northern California, Arizona, Pennsylvania. I thought, something's wrong here. So when I finally got my degree finished in chemistry, I wrote a paper on long-chain hydrocarbons, which is what oil is made of. It's just, long-chain hydrocarbons that we refine through various chemical means. We heat it and separate it by heating. We catalytically crack it into various things like gasoline and oil and toluene and polymers. However, I coupled that with cometary research, and I found that the tails of comets are all made of methane. And we're talking trillions and trillions of cubic tons of cubic yards of methane going through space. And these comets are an extremely different charge, electrical charge, than the planets they come up against. I read a paper about the origin of the Chicago fire and how it corresponded with a comet which had the head had broken apart the last time that it appeared, but the tail kept coming around every 7 years. And what happened was Earth passed through the tail of that comet, and the methane came into the atmosphere. As soon as it got close enough to discharge its difference in potential, these huge lightning bolts occurred high up in the sky. No clouds, just lightning bolts. And it ignited the methane. And these several hundred, million tons of methane came down from the sky, burning, and burnt Chicago to the ground. And so witnesses noticed concrete and steel buildings burning down in 5 minutes flat. And there were people who ran out of the city out into the scrapyards, and they died anyway, but they had no burns on their body. And the coins in their pockets were fused together. They were arc welded together because they were hit by these giant lightning bolts that were coming down out of the sky. Well, that fire didn't just burn Chicago. It burned 5 states. It burned all the way down into Idaho.
Why don't we hear that when we hear about the Great Chicago Fire?
Well, you can. Their papers are out there. It's very interesting. Communication didn't exist in those days to say, gosh, we burned 1 million acres of woods in eastern Idaho at the exact same time Chicago was burning to the ground. We hear about the Great Chicago Fire, but we don't hear about the other activities that corresponded with that. And then you go into the ancient record, and it talks about huge thunderstorms where oil or hoarfrost rained out of the sky. And it rained in such quantities that it filled rivers. And it was sort of a milky white substance. And some of it was even edible, which makes perfect sense, too. You create fats and carbon sugar. Long sugars are out of the same kind of structure.
Okay, Dr. Agnew, I hate to do it, but we have to take a break. We'll be back in just a moment.
iPod? Get K-Pods, the Kevin Smith Show podcast, and take Kevin with you everywhere. Subscribe today at kevinsmithshow.com.
Call the Kevin Smith Show toll-free at 1-800-289-1092. That's 1-800-289-1092.
Since 911, we've all become security conscious. We want to know the people whose job it is to protect us can actually do the job. The difference between a security guard and a security professional is professional training. In Arizona, the oldest and best DPS-approved security academy is Assessed Security Enforcement Training Academy. Make sure your security staff is the best. Call Assessed at 602-997-0041. What did the founder of the Vampire Church, the man who invented the 20th century, the single most credible alien abductee, anti-gravity technology, forbidden archaeological discoveries, evidence of genuine ghosts, the godfather of international Satanism, and the ominous evidence of an ancient bloodline controlling the nations all have in common? They all have one thing in common: the K-Files magazine. Subscribe today.
This is Charles Hall.
Hi, this is nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Hardcastle.
This is Jason Martell, researcher into the ancient astronaut theory.
You are listening to The Kevin Smith Show, the #1 talk show choice of many galaxies.
Call the...
And welcome back to the Kevin Smith Show, ladies and gentlemen. I am delighted that you have tuned in this evening, and I know you've been delighted that you have as well, because my guest, Dr. Brooks Agnew, is presenting some stuff that is just absolutely fascinating. Now, we're going to open the telephone line in the second hour. As a matter of fact, let me go ahead and give you the telephone number. It's a toll-free number. The number is 1-800-289-1092. 1-800-289-1092. If you're in the Phoenix area, it's 623-581-5148. Okay? And we're going to open the phone line and let you call in if you've got a question or a comment for Dr. Agnew. And, Doctor, before the break, we were talking about these... the fact that petroleum is not from a biological source.
Well, correct. I stated originally that oil comes from space, and what happened was I started collecting information about cometary tails, what I could find. Methane, as you know, is just CH3, and ethane's, two carbons, and butane, propane, butane, and so on. Long-chain hydrocarbons are formed, saturated or unsaturated, by pouring energy into those carbon molecules. So as these cometary tails, either methane or some complex of that comes into the atmosphere, there are huge, unbelievable discharges of electricity. When you combine that and oxygen, or depleted oxygen, say high in the stratosphere, but you have these tremendous electrical charges, you're forming these long-chain hydrocarbons, and thus the hydrocarbon rain pours down as a condensation onto the ground and seeps into substrata. And one of my theories was that oil comes from space, and of course the best way to prove that would be to find oil or long-chain hydrocarbons on another planet where we're reasonably sure there weren't any dinosaurs or jungles or ancient lake beds. And lo and behold, here comes this data from the moon Titan. As you know, we just sent the Huyen probe up there. Tremendous pictures came back from that. But one of the things that we discovered is that its oceans are made up of hydrocarbons. And although they may not be subjected to electrical storms or enough solar energy to form long chains, the raw materials are there. And if that were to be harvested and subjected to that kind of energy, you would definitely form long chain hydrocarbons very, very similar to crude oil.
There have been some reports out of NASA and by some scientists. I say out of NASA because obviously they are mission control. But there have been some reports from scientists who are studying the data from Titan who say that there may actually be electrical storms on Titan.
Yes, and lightning storms of that size, like we have here on this planet, may not be enough. We need to generate a lot more energy than that and it has to be out of the presence of oxygen, which we believe that's the condition on Titan. These oceans are actually, liquid methane and maybe even longer chain hydrocarbons. And then there is a sea inside the planet as well, where the temperature is getting down, getting up to somewhere around 200 to 300 degrees Kelvin, which may actually promote life. We just don't know. One thing that we do know is that proteins cannot form without DNA. You have to have DNA first.
And that is an interesting thing, because then where does the first DNA come from? And
First DNA, the DNA that we have on this planet, I'd say an easy 25% of all the health dollars spent on this planet in the last 20 years, and maybe even a higher number than that in the last 5 years, has been spent on genome research. And what we have almost irrefutably come up with is that DNA is an engineered molecule. There is no possible way that it could have formed on its own.
All right, we'll be right back with Dr. Brooks Agnew in just a moment.
Call the Kevin Smith Show at 1-800-289-1092.
And welcome back to the Kevin Smith Show. If you happen to be just now tuning in, you're tuning into the second hour, and I'm glad you're here, but next time, do it an hour earlier and get the whole show. You'll enjoy it. Okay, my guest this evening is Dr. Brooks Agnew. The telephone number is 1-800-289-1092, or in the Phoenix area, it is 623-581-5148. The toll-free number again, 1-800-289-1092, if you have a question or comment for Dr. Agnew. Now, Doctor, one of the, we'll get back to the oil in a minute, because I want to go back to Titan with that. I've got the article right here in my hand.
Okay.
So I want to get back to that. But now, one of the comments that I got in my email this week, in a couple of emails, on this show, we don't get into politics. On this show, we don't get into religious doctrine. The show is not anti-religion. The show is not anti-Christ. It is not anti-Judaism or anti-anything else. Okay? We just don't get into it. However, some of the topics, just by the nature of the topic, rub up against those a little bit sometimes. And a couple of the emails mentioned that you were talking about religion on the show. Well, I don't see it that way. You mentioned some things that happen to be in religious books, but you said that DNA has to be engineered. Does that require that there is God?
I'm going to say that in the ancient writings, they, because of the difference in interpretation of the universe or knowledge of the universe, or we're going to call it omniscience or knowledge of things greater than this planet, those that recorded the ancient documents on this planet had no choice but to revere those that gave them this knowledge as gods. When we look at the ancient Babylonian seals or the Akkadian seals, we see interaction of giant off-worlders with mortals, teaching them about things like an 11-planet solar system, which we still haven't found. We only know of 9. Or teaching them about interstellar space travel, or teaching them about metallurgy, or
so they pretty much had to say that's a god.
Yeah. And so in their writings they would say, God said, or God spoke to me, or I spoke with God face to face as a man does another. And religion is, I'm not that much of a historian. EJ's more the historian than I am. But what we do see is just a terrible advantage taken of the ignorant by governmental forces who assumed a religious position over the populace. Either they controlled knowledge, such as the ability to read and write, or they put the population in such fear of eternal damnation that they had to pay homage to the government church.
Yeah.
And, of course, I think we pretty much do that today. We still have religious leaders that stand up and say, we're gonna burn in hell for this, or that's sacrilegious, or you can't talk about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of blow that off.
Okay, we have a caller on the line, and
okay.
So caller, if you will, tell us your first name and where are you calling from?
It's Al from New York calling.
Okay, Al, what's on your mind tonight?
Well, actually a two-part question. The first has to do with oil and gas. I was wondering if Dr. Agnew knows of a process that's called the passive induced polarity. It's a geophysical detection technique that uses data related to geochemical, magnetic, gravitational, and radiation anomalies.
Okay, let's let him comment on that.
Okay.
Are you familiar with that?
Geophysical. I heard geophysical magnetic anomalies.
Gravitational
Is that what you're asking?
And radiation anomalies.
Yes. Well, I can tell you what experiments I've done with it. I built a mobile gamma spectrometer using a 4-inch sodium iodide crystal and software that would gather the spectrum from the ground. And what we would do is make gamma maps of large acreages. Maybe we could do 8 square miles in a day. And what we were specifically looking for were radioactive daughters of uranium. And some of them you're probably familiar with. Radon. Radon has a very short half-life, and because of that, it causes a lot of health problems when people breathe in those particles. Those radioactive particles decay, and then the high-energy neutron destroys genetic material and can cause cancer. But if the soil is very tight, and it takes a long, long time for that particle to get from deep in the earth up to the surface, the radon decays before it reaches the surface. So what you find are longer half-life daughters, like thorium or sodium-40 or things like that. So we would do ratiometric readings between radon and the other daughters of uranium, and we would, or daughters of radon, and we would tell whether the soil had the correct porosity or not to drill. That was our specific application.
Okay, Al, did you have a question about that?
Yeah, well, his is then 100% success rate then, right? Using your software to find
yes.
oil and gas?
The software...
hang on just a minute, Al. He said, did you have a 100% success rate?
Oh, yes. I had a 100% success rate whether I told them to drill or not. Sometimes I would tell them not to drill because there's no oil there. They would drill anyway. There was no oil there. But I did drill, I did find 55 wildcat wells without a miss.
Can somebody license your software?
Well, the software is store-bought. I just adapted it by writing some Visual Basic front page or interface to it so that you could use it in the field without having to boot up the software and download the information into Excel and then mathematically treat it. I embedded an OLE in the front of the software so that it would run those calculations on the front. But the software is store-bought, and you can get it through a company called Pulsir, Pulcir, out of Oak Ridge, Tennessee. My friend.
Is some of the bigger oil companies using your idea or concept to finding oil and gas on this planet?
That's a really good question. I actually tried to sell the concept to several big oil companies, but they weren't buying. Even when I found wells and the oil company would order Halliburton to come in behind me with gamma ray neutron to go down the hole that I just drilled, and we would match the gamma ray neutron scan from Halliburton against my radio scan, and they matched to the inch.
Okay, Al, did you have another question or comment?
Yeah, just the last one, Kevin. I listened to the first time the doctor was on. I believe he gave a description of the shining ones and the difference between them and the Nephilim and the Watchers. Is there a difference now? I think he mentioned something about Bolivia, finding some stuff there.
Okay, what about that, Dr. Agnew?
Yes, the Shining Ones were different than the Nephilim. The Nephilim were fallen angels, and they had quite a different mission. The Nephilim were interested in the downfall of man, not necessarily the extermination of them, because we're an eternal being having a mortal experience. But there's more of a subjugation and eternal capture strategy that they had, and they existed before and after the flood. They left the planet and then they came back. The Shining Ones, however, traveled the earth after the flood and helped communities recover. They taught them how to do agriculture, how to work metal. They taught them astronomy. They taught them medicine, social skills, and the set of scrolls that they helped form were called the Flying Scrolls. They were in the hands of some of the ancients. It's reported that Abraham actually had some of them. And they were called Flying Scrolls because the scrolls could actually levitate. The scrolls had very unique properties that the historical record talks about. And these scrolls were used to form governments and to create social systems for people. It is a little bit beyond, well, it's not speculation. It's pretty much historical fact that Thomas Jefferson had access to excerpts from the Flying Scrolls, and it is from these scrolls that the Constitution, the original Constitution of the United States, was drafted. That's why it took so few days to draft it, and it underwent so little revision.
Okay, Al, thank you for your call, and keep listening. I hope you call again. Ladies and gentlemen, the telephone number is 1-800-289-1092. That's the toll-free number, 1-800-289-1092. If you have a question or comment for Dr. Agnew, this is your opportunity. Call in. You can talk to him. I'll put you on the line with him. Dr. Agnew, that's the first...
One thing I wanted to mention about
Sure.
the Shining Ones is that their language, we did an extreme amount of research on their language and their written language, and we actually make an anthropological revelation in the volume 2, which I don't want to give on the air. I want people to read the book, but we have hard evidence that the Shining Ones existed in at least 2 different continents at the same time on the earth.
Okay. And this might be a good time also. You told me before the show that you all the listeners, you gave them a special offer last time about your book, and you told me that you're going to do that again. Let's do that right now.
Yeah, actually, we're going to soup it up a little bit here. You can go to the arkofmillionsofyears.com. It's actually arkofmillionsofyears.com, spelt with a K like Noah's Ark. And if you purchase Volume 1 today during the show, or we're going to extend it for 24 hours, and put in the code on the online store page, STAR, S-T-A-R, you will get free shipping. And we will also give you the complete Volume 1 audiobook for free. We'll send it to you for nothing if you buy the book. And that's a $25 value, and the shipping is in the U.S. is about $4. So that's almost $30 value for a $19.95 paperback. I think the hardback's a little bit more than that. And you will also get 10% discount on Volume 2 that comes out in 4 weeks.
Can't beat it. And that's at arkofmillionsofyears.com.
Correct.
Okay. Let me give the telephone number here again. It is 1-800-289-1092. 1-800-289-1092. Now, just a moment ago, you said that there is good historical evidence that Thomas Jefferson had access to at least some of the writings. It was on these what do you call it? Flying scrolls.
Flying scrolls.
Uh-huh.
That's correct.
First time I've ever heard that.
Well,
so tell me about it. I'm interested. Tell me.
This took a lot of research to find. As you know, there's during the time of the Revolutionary War, one of the bodies of the political bodies that was very, very powerful on the earth were the Freemasons. Well, that association goes back a long, long way. My family in 1319 built the castle in Stranraer, Scotland, and we were the hereditary sheriffs of Galloway, associated with being vassals for people like King Henry VIII and Edward the Bruce, which is son of Robert the Bruce, who was a close friend with William Wallace. So you kind of get the picture of the history. One of the edifices that was built some 70 kilometers away from our castle is Rosslyn Chapel. Now, Rosslyn Chapel is arguably one of the greatest spiritual epicenters of Western Europe and the UK. At that building, inside the chapel, there is carving evidence that the Freemasons, the Knights of Christ, were involved with building and protecting that chapel. I think there's a popular book out there right now about it, and there's a movie coming out this year that popularizes the Freemason Knights of Christ, Knights Templar relationship with early politics. But it goes back much, much further than that, all the way to Solomon's Temple. Inside the Solomon's Temple were hollow columns. Inside those columns are where the flying scrolls were stored. Those flying scrolls passed down from hand to hand until, greedy men wanted their hands on it because there were great, fantastic capabilities of these scrolls, not the least of which was the power to turn lead into gold. And there were governments that really wanted their hands on this, one of which was Philip the Fair, who assaulted the Freemasons and martyred thousands of them trying to get his hands on these scrolls. Well, he didn't, and the scrolls proliferated. They passed down from hand to hand. It is more than rumor that Christopher Columbus had a set of scrolls given to him by his father-in-law, who was a Knight of Christ, and it was with these scrolls and the maps therein that Columbus sailed the earth without ever getting lost. Inside these scrolls also were the clear structure of a free government. And now here's where we're going to make a lot of waves, and it's going to be fun. Because
it's your wave, man. Go ahead and surf.
Well, I like it. The Freemasons were on both sides of the Revolutionary War. The British and the Americans had a lot of Freemasons in their leadership. George Washington was a Freemason. John Madison was a Freemason. Thomas Jefferson never claimed to be one, but from his activities and the work that he produced, we're pretty sure he was a Freemason. In any case, when the Revolutionary War was being fought, the British outgunned us, they outmanned us, they outsupplied us, they had better training, better weapons, and yet they lost. And one of the reasons that they lost is during key battles, the leadership on both sides were Freemasons. They had a brotherhood that went beyond the uniforms that they wore. I'll tell you two historical stories. One is George Washington. When they would go out on patrol, they would capture British soldiers, and they would, of course, take their effects and spread them out among the American troops. But all the effects were brought to Washington first, so that he could go through them and decide where they went. During one of these captures in Valley Forge, which is, one of the desperate times of the war, there was a personal bag that was brought to him. On the surface of the bag was a Freemason symbol, which he recognized. He asked for the officer to whom that bag belonged to be brought to him, and he interrogated him for half the day. They became close friends because their brotherhood was such that they had a higher purpose. They knew of a prophecy in which in the latter days there would be a nation called the New Jerusalem that would be formed. And it had specific characteristics. Not that it would be called New Jerusalem, but that it would have certain characteristics. And one of those was a set of rules that allowed people to have freedom of religion, freedom of speech, able to own property, able to represent themselves in government, all of these things. They knew that this nation would come forth. Well, that prisoner of war was well treated during the war. After the war, he returned to England, and on his deathbed, he requested George Washington, then President of the United States, to come to England and dress him for burial. And George Washington did it. He went to England and he dressed this man in the Freemason manner during his final hours and stayed for the funeral and then returned to the U.S. The reason that we won the Revolutionary War is because the Freemason leadership in both governments knew this would be that nation, and they could not fight against the prophecy.
Well, you were absolutely correct. You are now rocking boats. Does it bother you to rock boats?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I am speaking completely factual evidence, and we document it with hundreds of references that are irrefutable in the book. I did not pull this out of the sky.
Well, I have to tell you, that's not in our history books, and that's not what they teach us in school. And there are going to be a lot of folks that, well, that's quite all right. That's good. But there's going to be a lot of folks that may disagree with that. And there'll be a lot that do agree. That's fascinating. But what's the connection to Jefferson?
Well, the connection is that you had two countries that shared a similar religion. They obviously spoke the same language. Many of them had the same family roots. But, we've fought wars like that before. The bloodiest war in our history was the North against the South, but they didn't have a common purpose either. The common purpose of the British Army and the American Army, the leadership of it, was the same. But the king that ordered to put down this insurrection and bring this uppity colony back under subjugation had a different mission than the leadership of the army. Now, I'm not saying Cornwallis had that idea, but his colonels and his lieutenants and those that actually ran the patrols out in the trenches had the same mission as the Freemason brothers on the other side of the field.
It's interesting, and I've seen aerial maps of Washington, D.C., how geometric Washington, D.C. is. And
it goes well beyond that. Washington was one of the original architects of Washington, D.C., and also of American currency. We would not have had a chance of winning the war if it was not for Jerusalem. For the Jews supplied millions and millions of dollars to the American army. There were Jewish millionaires that died paupers because they gave every single penny they had to see this nation be formed, and they funded the American army to their devastation. It was because of this gratitude that Washington ordered, by executive order, he ordered these Freemason symbols to be put into our architecture, and specifically Jewish symbols to be put into our currency. The stars that are on the dollar bill are arranged in the Star of David. There are 13 steps to the pyramid. I think all those signs are very well known. We don't need to go into them, but the fact is that Washington is the one that spearheaded all of that. And we needed, as a new nation, we needed some age. We needed some wisdom. We were a young nation, and so all of our architecture was designed after the ancient Freemason architecture, so as to give us an immediate appearance of solidity and wisdom.
Now, do you subscribe to the view that many people have, that the Freemasons are a secret society of the darker sort that are attempting to control the country. That's that's a rumor that's out there.
The Freemasons of today are a men's club compared to what they used to be. They have forgotten, or they deny, the power of the association between themselves and the ancient off-worlder teachers that taught them these eternal truths. They deny all of that. They treat it like a men's club and a social club, and my interpretation of it is, anyway, that they don't pay any attention to anything but the symbols today. They don't recognize the power of the original association at all, and I doubt they even know where the Flying Scrolls are.
So you think the Flying Scrolls still exist?
They absolutely still exist. In fact, in the book, we reveal the location of at least one Hall of Records where some of them may be kept.
When is this book coming out?
In the new volume, we reveal what we believe to be the location of the Ark of the Covenant, or at least one of the copies.
When is this book coming out?
4 weeks.
In 4 weeks. And do you have a title for it yet?
Yes, it's, of course, The Ark of Millions of Years, Volume 2, but it's subtitled 2012 and the Harvest of the End Times.
Wow. And anybody that listening to the show that buys The Ark of Millions of Years, Volume 1, which is already published, will get a 10% discount on that book. Is that right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll get the audiobook, and they get free shipping if they put the code word STAR, S-T-A-R, in the code word box on the online store.
Okay. Now, let's go back to Jefferson.
Okay.
Now, what evidence is there that he saw any of the writings that were on these scrolls?
The best evidence that I can tell you on the radio is that when he locked himself into a room for 6 days to write the Constitution, there was only one draft. He wrote it by hand one time. There were no copies. There were no edits. Nothing. He just walked out with it written down.
So it's almost as if he either was copying it from something else.
Either copied it or it was dictated to him.
Uh-huh. Or he had read it and he was remembering.
That's possible. But if you look at the sentence structure, they did have a more flamboyant language in those days. But you can tell from the length of sentences, the verb agreement, the congruity of the entire document, that it was not made up in that 6 days out of his head.
Mm-hmm. It is an amazing document. And,
many people don't know, we have the oldest constitution on the face of the earth right now. And many countries have almost an identical constitution that we do, but they don't maintain the balance of powers the way we do. They defer to the executive, and so they fall into this terrible dictatorship, which I guess if you have a benevolent leader or king, it's a great world. But most men, most mortals are corrupted by that kind of power, and they do not want to see their power go away, and so they take actions like all men do to keep that power. And unless it's limited or balanced between the people and the leadership, it falls into evil.
Yes, and, evil is, as the movie says, everywhere under the sun. It is a persistent and pernicious and almost omnipresent force.
Well, the truths on the Flying Scrolls are irrefutable. Truth is truth, but truth in the hands of wickedness is devastating.
Now, these Flying Scrolls, you obviously understand that when people hear you mention Flying Scrolls, that's difficult for them to believe.
Well, I'm not interpreting anything. That's what they're called.
Yeah.
I didn't make it up.
Okay. But now you can obviously foresee the fact that there would be a lot of people skeptical of that. And in your second book, do you provide some documentation for the reality of those flying scrolls?
Well, the documentation's in the first volume. There are over 400 different references in the first volume alone. The second volume does not have as many references because we're going from how we got here to where we're going, and it's a little more speculative. But we do tie in two ancient races that heretofore, and I mean heretofore the printing of this book, nobody knew were tied in together. Once we tie these two races together, it changes the anthropology of this planet.
Now, in our first visit, when you were with us last week, you talked about the fact that we are all a hybrid being. All of us are hybrids. Is that correct?
Yes, we are descendants of a merged race of two human races, one of which was Adam to Noah on one planet, and then the rest of us that existed on this planet for a long, long time before they got here. When the two planets merged together, the two races also merged, and that DNA survived. It had a Darwinian advantage on this planet, not only from intelligence, but also in a burst of clean, pure DNA. As I said in the last show, I have a friend that breeds genetically pure hogs, and in any hog population, it's similar in any kind of biological population, the genetic material degrades over time, and especially if there are conditions through which weakness can proliferate, which obviously happens in a human society because we are social beings and we help each other along. The weak do survive. And what he does is he sells these pairs of hogs for a lot of money, flies them into these herds, and their genes then strengthen the herd. And so all subsequent generations benefit from that influx of fresh, new, clean, uncorrupted DNA. And that's what we see happened around 3800 BC.
Okay, more with my guest, Dr. Brooks Agnew, when we return from this brief break. Since 9/11, we've all become security conscious. We want to know the people whose job it is to protect us can actually do the job. The difference between a security guard and a security professional is professional training. In Arizona, the oldest and best DPS-approved security academy is Assessed Security Enforcement Training Academy. Make sure your security staff is the best. Call Assessed at 602-997-0041.
Got iPod? Get K-Pods, the Kevin Smith Show podcast, and take Kevin with you everywhere. Subscribe today at kevinsmithshow.com.
What did the founder of the Vampire Church, the man who invented the 20th century, the single most credible alien abductee, anti-gravity technology, forbidden archaeological discoveries, evidence of genuine ghosts, the godfather of international Satanism, and the ominous evidence of an ancient bloodline controlling the nations all have in common? They all have one thing in common: the K-Files magazine. Subscribe today. And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Kevin Smith Show. My guest this evening, Dr. Brooks Agnew. We have just about a half hour, a little less than a half hour left. If you have a comment or a question, be sure that you take this opportunity to talk with Dr. Agnew. The telephone number, toll-free, 1-800-289-1092. 1-800-289-1092. And we'll put you on the line with Dr. Agnew. You can make your comment, ask your question. You can agree, you can disagree. It doesn't matter. Just make your case. Dr. Agnew, we were talking about all of us being hybrids and are descendants of hybrids. So, that being the case, when we say hybrids, are we talking about humans having mixed with off-worlders, extraterrestrials, or what are we talking about when we talk about hybrids here?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because we're really not talking about the classic extraterrestrial, like people coming in silver spaceships and landing and breeding with man. What is proposed in the book is a phenomenon called the union of the polarity. I can't go into enough detail in half an hour, but basically you have two entangled planets in different dimensions. One created near the center of our galaxy or a different dimensional galaxy, and one created here in this solar system. When I'm going to put in a little bit about spinning black holes. When a supermassive spinning black hole forms what's called an Einstein-Rosen bridge, or a wormhole, or a time tunnel, what do you want to picture in your mind's eye? One planet sent through that into another dimension or another portion of the universe, a different level of energy. You have two planets that came together of different phase of energy, sort of like pouring water into a large bucket full of glass marbles. You have matter of two different consistencies existing in the same space at the same time. In superstring theory, when vibrations harmonize, they form matter. One of those vibrations we know mathematically to be called a graviton, which pulls different subatomic particles together into atomic particles, and so on and so forth. This is the basis of superstring theory. The same thing happened with these two planets. Both planets had their own populations. And of course, it is a cataclysmic event bringing two planets together like this. So 90% of both populations were wiped out, maybe even more than that, maybe 99%. But the survivors on those two planets were able to breed with one another. And they did breed with one another. And the record shows, not only from the point of view of the arriver, Noah and his people, but also from the point of view of the people that were here when they got here. And we put that documentation in the book. The story is told from both sides of the story. You want to call it religion? Wonderful. But we look at it as a multidimensional, multicultural, multilingual historical record of an event that occurred. There is a geological, a paleobiological, a paleobotanical, and a written record that this event did in fact occur. And so we are the result of that union. So if you want to, technically we are a hybrid. You have two populations that grew independent of each other with their own environments, their own effects on their genetic material for thousands of years. And then they were brought together, and a new race came forth out of that. And we are descendants of that race.
Now, based on your research and your co-author's research, I believe you said she is a geologist? No, an archaeologist.
Archaeologist.
Uh-huh. From your research and from her research, have you been able to put a geological date on this event?
That event, also known as the Great Flood or the Flood of Noah, we put at 3800 BC. That is a little bit at odds with some of the accepted dates, but We stand by it, we support it, and I'd be more than willing to trade papers on it. I think we can back it up. One of the things that we also noticed as we're putting this together, and we really go into this in the second volume, is the fact that we are coming to the end of a precession, the end of a 26,000-year precession. This is as some of your listeners might know, the circle that the axis of the Earth draws as it goes through the zodiac, goes through the 12 constellations. We're coming to the end of that, 360 degrees around. We're coming to the dawn of the age of Aquarius, if you want to look at it from astrological point of view. And it also coincides with what we have calculated as the fifth sun. And one of the things that's associated with that historically, when we go back and look, are tremendous climatological and geological changes in the Earth. And one of the reasons why, and we make this theory very strongly, and I guess we're going to be borne out in the next 7 years, whether we're right or not, but so far we are. In 2004, we published the book that storms would become much more violent and much more frequent, that the time of the storms would begin to shift, that there would be increase in earthquakes, an increase in volcanic activity, and in 2005 we were borne out. In 2006 it will continue.
And where are we headed?
Well, that is that's a whole other show.
Let me refine that a little bit. Look, I'm not going to ask you to look into a crystal ball and tell us, what the future holds for the Earth. I mean, that no matter how reliable you think your research is, as you said, we will know really when it happens. But here's what I mean by the question. What I mean by the question is, now that you have presented this information, and your predictions of increased storm activity and volcanoes and so forth, all of that's going on. Now here we are, we're humans, we're living on this planet. Where do I go from here? I mean, should I be afraid? Should I think that annihilation is coming? Or I mean, what is the human response we should look for?
I'm glad you asked that question. We're not here to strike fear into people or to say, head for the mountains or, despair or party because we're doomed. That's not what we're about. What we're trying to do is arouse your faculties and realize that what we are not predicting but recalling is a cycle of things that happen to this Earth on a regular cyclic basis. And right now the cycle is coming back, and it's probably going to act just like it did the last time we came around to this cycle. That's what we put in the book. Call it a prediction if you want to, but when we said in 2005 that solar flare activity was going to increase, or 2004 when we published the book, actually it was December of 2004, that all of these things were going to happen, I told EJ, I said, we're taking a great risk because we're actually coming up to a cycle with decreased sunspot activity. We probably won't see solar flares for maybe another 10 years. And we did see decreased solar sunspot activity. I mean, it's virtually non-existent. But then in October of 2005, we had 9 X-class flares in about a 3-day period. And one of them was the biggest that's ever been recorded. So when that happened, I said, well, I guess we're getting there. It was completely opposite of what solar scientists thought would happen, but it was in our book.
Well, one of the things that I you can imagine doing what I do, this talk show, I get presented all kinds of ideas about what the future may hold. And some of those are pretty scary.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I have adopted this philosophy about dealing with the future. We're all going to know it at the same moment.
Some of us sooner than that, because as I said, there is some evidence, and you can refute it if you want to, but there is a consciousness that...
Well, we lost you for a moment. Try it again.
Okay. There is evidence that there is a higher consciousness to the human, that we're not necessarily locked in to this second in time. We have either born in us or born and forgot, or that we need to develop a sense that we can pick up information from the past and from the future and from other dimensions. That's not what this book is about, although we do document out-of-body experiences from a clinical point of view. We don't go into the unprovable. We're only talking about the clinical results that came from double-blind studies and things like that. But the evidence is that there is a feeling that people have everywhere. And I've talked to them all over the world, and they have this feeling that something is about to happen. And there's a tremendous curiosity, and some people have a dread about it, and some people are despairing. Others are looking forward to it with joy. It's going to have a different effect on different people. So, sure, when it shows up in the sky, or when a mountain juts up out of the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, we're all going to know it at the same time. That's true.
Yeah.
But the fact that the planet is going to go through these changes, we want people to be aware of that so that they come to one of two conclusions, hopefully both of them. The first is we are not alone in the universe.
And what is the second one?
The second one is that that the forces that are in the universe oppose each other. That not everybody is friendly. I made the statement in the last show that God has enemies. That's basically what we found in the record. The truths that people have their hands on right now are true, but in the hands of men with evil design, they can be more terrible than you can imagine.
Let's go to the phone line. Caller, what is your name, your first name, and where are you calling from?
It's me again, Kevin. I just went to your website and ordered the doctor's book, Volume 1. I just want to ask the doctor, how can I get a hold of him directly? Would I have to call the Clark and Agnew publications?
Okay, let's let him answer, and we're headed into a break.
He wanted to get his hands on what?
Wanted to talk to you directly off the air. How can I get in contact with you?
Okay.
You can just email me directly, and we'll set up a time.
Okay, hang on, guys. We have to go to a break. We'll be back with more of Dr. Brooks Agnew right after this. And welcome back to the Kevin Smith Show. I hope you have gotten all of this 2 hours because this has been fascinating stuff. My guest, Dr. Brooks Agnew. And we've got time. If you've got a really quick question or a really quick comment, I'll take a fast call, okay? 1-800-289-1092. Dr. Agnew, the question that was being asked as we went to break had to do with your email address or how to get in contact with you.
Sure. All you really have to do is go to the website. And of course, the email link is right there under authors, but you can reach me at bagnew@arcofmillionsofyears.com, and I answer all the email. I get a lot, but I spend the time, and I've answered lengthy questions, and I've even done extra research to find the answer for people. So that's part of the reason why we wrote the book. We really want to arouse people's faculties. We want to get them to ask these questions, and we have some really, really incredible readers out there that have done some great research. In fact, the book is being used as a support textbook at a major university.
Well, is that right?
Now.
Well, I was going to ask you, how do your colleagues in science treat this?
Well, my astronomy buddies are pretty hardcore as far as bad science or wanting hard facts. They also don't believe in UFOs. However, some of them do belong to the Mutual UFO Network, so they can't be all bad. They're open-minded to it. I point out the evidence, and they may draw a different conclusion, but a lot of them think that, we crawled forth from the primordial ooze as well, which we proved to be false.
I've met some people that I would believe that about.
Well, we want people to know that intelligent design is completely independent of religion. There are those.
But see, it doesn't sound that way now. When you discuss it with us, it sounds as if there has to be a God.
Well, I cannot say anything about intelligent design not or denying that there's a God. But that's not the purpose of the book. That's not the purpose of our research. What we're trying to prove is that we did not accidentally happen, that the planet didn't accidentally happen, the universe didn't accidentally happen. The odds against it are slightly worse than the odds of you leaning up against the wall and all of your molecules dematerializing and you drifting through that wall and rematerializing on the other side. Yes, the odds are worse than that. Or think about it as an egg rolling off your table onto the floor and splattering, and then you sitting there in your kitchen waiting for that egg to reassemble itself and pop back up on the table. The odds are actually worse than that.
So from your point of view, then intelligent design is an established fact from your point of view.
Well, I say from a scientific point of view because the fingerprints are there. In the DNA, we see where the splicing was done. In the biological record, in muck vents dug up from the fjords of Norway, we see the evidence. It's inarguable. You mentioned earlier that there are no skeletons of giants on display in museums, and yet thousands of skeletons have been found. What does that tell you? The evidence is there, but there are organized forces that don't want you to know it.
Okay, very quickly, give us your web address again so people can get your book.
Sure, the web address is arkofbillionsofyears.com. Make sure to spell that like A-R-K, like Noah's Ark. And it's, of course, up there 24 hours a day. You can get the book by going to your local Barnes & Noble, Davis Kidd, or Joseph Best booksellers, or, of course, you can buy it anywhere online. But the best deal is at our website because we'll give you the audiobook for free for Kevin Smith Show listeners, and we'll also give you free shipping if you'll put in the code word STAR, S-T-A-R, at the online store.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Brooks Agnew. Ladies and gentlemen, we are out of time. Don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter at kevinsmithshow.com and check out the podcast while you're there, okay? My friends call me Steel Eye. My enemies do too, and you can call me whatever you'd like. Just keep coming back again and again and again. Until tomorrow night. So long, everybody.